I call the November 13th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. And can we have roll call, please?
Commission Chair Toit is absent. Commissioner Springer?
Here.
Commissioner Halstead?
Here.
Commissioner McIntyre?
Here.
Vice Chair Fikes?
Here.
Commissioner Askin?
Here.
Commissioner Greenberg?
Here.
Vice Chair Fikes, you have a quorum.
Thank you. And let's see. We have an approval for the agenda.
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
With the additional laydowns?
Sorry, this with the additional layout thing.
I'll second.
Thank you. And do we have a consent agenda?
I move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
I second.
Thank you.
Do we have any objections to either of those?
Is there any objections?
Thanks. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Alrighty. And seeing we have scheduled public comment, is there anyone wishing to speak tonight on anything that is not on the agenda? Okay, seeing as there is not, let's see. We will move on to E, consideration of plats. We have none. We will move on to F, public hearings. We have one, resolution PZ 2019-43. It's an application for a conditional use permit to operate a gunsmithing business located at 1006 Inlet Woods Drive, Kenai, Alaska, 9911, and further described as Lot 2A, Block 2, Inlet Woods Subdivision, Moore, replat. The application was submitted by Paul N. Beggins, 1006 Inlet Woods Drive. Staff report?
Thank you, Vice Chair Fikes. The applicant states that he would fine-tune a prototype apparatus used to clean guns using typical amounts of gun cleaning solvents that are already widely available. He would not be mixing or adjusting the typical solvents used to clean guns. What he would like to do is order guns and then fine-tune his prototype apparatus for cleaning the guns. My staff report starts on page 12 of the packet, and I go through the 6 review criteria for conditional use permits. And before I just briefly review that, I wanted to point out a couple things in the packet. So on page 20, we have a letter from the property owner, Roseanne Wilson, giving permission for this activity. It's the Ms. Wilson is the fiance of the applicant who lives on the property, and she has submitted this letter stating her permission as the owner of the house. And then page 21 of the packet has a site plan. And page 23, there's a photo showing the property. So it's a 3-car garage, and this activity is proposed to be on the I guess right third part of the garage. And so on the site plan, there's a wall that almost separates this area entirely from the rest of the garage. There's an opening demarked with a dashed line, and the applicant is proposing to put some sort of sliding door or other cage-like door that he could lock that would then fully separate this area from the rest of the garage. And then on page 22, there's a photo from a site visit just shows the right-hand side of the garage, and you can see on the left-hand side is the wall of the garage, and then if you would keep going, that's where the little opening is, where you would put the sliding door. And then pages 24 and 25 of the packet contain some maps. So the first one is an aerial view, and then the next one is a little bit zoomed out that just shows the surrounding zoning. So it's within the suburban residential zone, and then in the immediate vicinity, there's also a few parcels that are zoned for rural residential. So in my staff report, I go over the six criteria for granting a conditional use permit. The first is that the use is consistent with the intent of the zoning district. So this is the RS zone, or suburban residential. It provides for medium density or residential development, prohibits uses which would violate the residential character of the environment or generate heavy traffic. So I've stated that this criteria is met because this business use for gunsmithing would be secondary or incidental to the single-family residential use. It really wouldn't be visible to the average person on the outside. The applicant does not propose to put a sign up. He thought the only outside visibility would be some potential additional postal traffic or maybe just some administrative traffic, but he doesn't expect to have customers come in for his gunsmithing business. He just, again, he wanted to test his prototype for cleaning guns, which is a new physical apparatus that he's designed. The second criteria is the value of adjoining property and neighborhood would not be significantly impaired. I stated that that was met, again, because I didn't think it would really be apparent to the average person and would be unlikely to significantly impair the value of adjoining property in the neighborhood. 3 is the uses in harmony with the comprehensive plan. So I reference a couple goals, including economic development, in that Keno will have a forward-looking approach to community growth and development as part of land use. The 4th criteria is public services and facilities are adequate. I concluded that condition is met because there's access from Inlet Woods Drive, the property is connected to city water and sewer, and there's no real need for parking or a retail area or anything like that with additional traffic. The 5th criteria is the use would not be harmful to public safety, health, or welfare. And here's where I reviewed some additional approvals that this applicant would need before he could operate, which I state clearly in the recommended conditions. So he would need federal approval from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF. He'd also need an inspection by the fire marshal. And then I also just note that he expects to have a small amount of regular gun cleaning solvents. I don't expect there to be like chemicals or anything like that. It's just typical gun cleaning solvents that I didn't think would be different from anyone else who cleans guns already within the city. And this parcel is also within a part of the city where discharge of firearms is not allowed. And then the 6th criteria is recommended conditions. And so I stated several within the staff report. So I recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission approve this conditional use permit for gunsmithing subject to the following conditions. And those are: the applicant must comply with all federal, state, and local regulations. 2, the applicant files an annual report for the conditional use report. 3, the applicant meets with city staffs when on-site inspections are requested. 4, if there's a change in use, that the applicant would have to either amend his conditional use permit or apply for a new one. And I specifically stated that a change in use would include if he would have customers at the garage instead of this this described use where he wants to test his apparatus on guns. The 5th would be that the permit expires automatically if the use is interrupted for a period of at least 1 year. That's laid out in code. 6, the applicant would submit a copy of his federal firearms license issued by the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ETF. 7, prior to operation, the fire marshal inspects and approves the property, and then this is done biannually or every 2 years after the initial inspection. 8, the applicant installs any additional security as required by federal laws, and that casual access would not be available to the garage. 9, if the applicant would ever put up a sign, he would obtain a sign permit from the city. And 10, that if the applicant would fail to document that he's met these conditions to the city, it could be grounds for suspension or revocation of the conditional use permit. And that's the end of my staff report.
Thank you. Can I get a motion?
Vice Chair. I'd like to make a motion to approve PZ, Resolution PZ 2019-43.
Thank you, Commissioner Springer. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Commissioner Askin. I will go ahead and open it up to the public for any testimony. Anyone wishing to speak to PZ 2019-43? If you'll just step right up there to the mic and we can help you adjust it. Get you on record. If you could state your name and your address, please.
Am I to be here? Yes. Sitting, standing, doesn't matter? Whatever makes you comfortable. Okay. None of this makes me comfortable. My name is Rhonda Baisden. I've been a Kenai resident since 1998, and I received this notice because I am a property owner within 300 feet of this property. Actually, it's closer to maybe 50 feet. My property at 1009 Inlet Woods is directly across the street from this property that's being considered for this conditional use permit. And I have concerns about this conditional use permit being allowed in a city zoned residential area. And we've owned this property since 2001, as well as the lot beside of our home and behind our home. And we chose this area specifically for the nature of its zoning. And it's conducive to family living, and it's far enough from town not to be disturbed by the lights and the traffic and noise, and it's convenient for a quick run to town. And the building use restrictions for the Inlet Woods subdivision, Part 1, Plat KRB 84-279 specifically states that no lot shall be used except for residential purposes. Commercial utilization of the lots is expressly forbidden. And these two words, in my mind, leave no room for a gray area. Expressly forbid does not have multiple meanings. And this document goes on to address nuisance, and it states that no noxious or offensive activity should be carried upon any lot, nor shall anything be done thereon which may or may become an annoyance or nuisance to the neighborhood. And this leads me to believe that this residential area was totally committed to a harmonious existence of homes and families, nothing more. And this document that was used for us to base our decision almost 2 decades ago to purchase this property in the city of Kenai. And at that time, my husband was the fire marshal for the city of Kenai, and the condition of his job mandated that he live within the city's boundaries. And this Inlet Woods property met that criteria for his job and for the neighborhood structure that we wish to have. And allowing this conditional use permit to someone who has resided in this property, in this neighborhood for less than a year, and he is not the homeowner, as other properties around him, which is being considered is a direct violation of the building and use restrictions for the subdivision. And why would the previous planners of this area go to such lengths and use such wordings to protect the neighborhood zone if it was never going to be honored? By definition, gunsmithing is manufacturing, importing, and dealing of firearms, has nothing to do with cleaning. cleaning is never mentioned. No federal firearms license is needed to clean your gun. I don't believe that the applicant is being upfront about his true intentions of his plans. On page 8, section 1 of the city's report, you state that the applicant will need to amend his conditional use permit if he begins to have customers. Who's going to exactly monitor the comings and goings, and who's a customer in his house? How will that be monitored? In section 2, the applicant proposes it will be unlikely to significantly impair the value of adjoining properties. And what's this based on? What if it doesn't affect the value of the properties? Who's responsible for that? Of my investment that I've had for almost 2 decades. It also states that he would need to obtain a permit from the city if he ever decides to put up a sign. But it really should state no signage will be allowed because, again, in the building and use restrictions, signs are addressed. No sign should be placed unless it's for sale of property, not businesses. Is that my time?
That's our 5 minute. Are you about ready to wrap it up?
I've got 2 more pages, but I go through and address the inconsistencies of, that his plans aren't consistent with what he's proposing and what he's needing for permits. And, I believe that I just Googled, I don't clean my guns. I have guns, I don't clean them. But I just Googled really quick, the MSDS is the material safety data sheets for the top 4 gun solutions for cleaning, and they all listed an array of hazards, toxicity, dangerous to the environment, harmful vapors, even to the point of being fatal if inhaled. So no, there's nothing in his proposal that's going to protect the families that are around his residence, kids that are playing in the yard and sleeping in their beds, just feet from where his house is. And there are 15 commercial lease properties in Kenai right now, 11 commercial properties for sale. One of them happens to be Gator Guns. That would be a perfect location for some business like this. And I object to allowing this business in Inlet Woods. It would be inappropriate and unduly detrimental to the surrounding residential neighborhood's character and property values. The nature of the business is a very real potential of being injurious to the public health and safety and welfare. I am not against guns. I'm a member of the NRA. I'm not against economic development, but there are times when an idea is a poor fit, and this is one of those times.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oops. Anybody else in the audience that's wishing to testify? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion.
I have a few questions.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
So, I think it was brought up in that, the testimony as well. It's curious that there's an FFL or a gunsmithing license that's required. It sounds more like he's creating a cleaning tank or a cleaning solution or a cleaning apparatus of some sort, which doesn't require gunsmithing at all to do. I mean, gunsmithing is modifying a firearm. This is cleaning it. So I'm curious, is he planning on doing other items other than creating this apparatus? Or it seems more like he's prototyping a tank, and I don't know if you're here or not, but again, I'm not quite sure what a gunsmithing license why that would require that. And to address the second question that was brought up was because there are solutions that are involved, any idea of the volume that's being used? I mean, typically cleaning a gun's a little blob of a solvent on a patch, and this could be a gallon of solution or whatever it is, which is fine as long as whatever that apparatus is containing it. But are there plans in spill mitigation that were looked into? You know, if he's working in a garage, that's gonna have a floor drain typically that drains right into the ground, and you wouldn't wanna have something like that into the ground. That's where I would see a hazardous situation. But again, it all kind of depends on what the goal is of this. I mean, I don't mind home businesses, and I don't think a business running out of your garage is gonna be anything more than if someone was selling cosmetics or candles or anything like that. It's gonna be as intrusive as operating that. But again, the issues would be the hazards of large chemicals or so on and so forth.
Good questions. Does staff have any input on that?
Yes, I can provide some additional information to the commission that to help you in your decision making. So first, I did have a phone call with the applicant where I asked him about the chemicals or the amount. He estimated he said he thought he would have trouble even filling up like a Tilex bottle or like a regular Windex bottle. So it seemed like a small amount, and he said he would just be using whatever is commercially available. He wouldn't be modifying what is typically used as far as a solvent to clean a gun. And then second, his overall plan is, so he's designed some sort of improvement over the physical apparatus that is used to clean a gun. And what he wants to do is make sure it will fit different styles of guns. And so that's where I felt this was a commercial use where he would be ordering guns to fit that. Eventually, he does want to market this, but he wouldn't plan to do that out of his garage. He just wants to do the initial testing so he could figure out and fine-tune his apparatus for different models. And then eventually he said he would like to then sell this either in other stores, or he would open up some sort of retail store elsewhere. But he just wanted to get the permission to do his initial testing of how this apparatus fits within his garage. And then there's one other point of information I just wanted to provide to the commission. So it's these building and use restrictions. So these are the subdivision covenants. And I didn't include this in the staff report because I typically don't. And so I didn't want to include it if it's not something I would do normally. So the city doesn't enforce the subdivision covenant, so that would be up to the homeowners association. And so that's I believe that's the document that that was referenced with the public comment. So I just wanted to let the commission know that I checked with the city attorney, and this would be up to the homeowners association to enforce. So just that bit of information that there's nothing that says explicitly that this language here isn't enforced by the city. And then I think I answered all of your questions. And Commissioner Halstead, is that correct?
Yes, I still think it is a little bit of a gray area when we talk about a gunsmithing license versus a federal firearms license for actually purchasing guns and what that entails versus what he's wanting to do. Again, I think it's like getting a dental degree to design a toothbrush, but I think you've answered it adequately. Thank you.
Vice Chair.
Yes.
Question for staff, just to clarify. So we shouldn't base our decision on subdivision covenants? Is that what you're saying, what the attorney has said then?
Yes, that's correct. Everything else that was said, I think the commission should take into account, but just what was specifically said in the subdivision covenants, where it does state no lot shall be used except for residential purposes. So that's up to the but that's not city code. That's up to the homeowners association to enforce.
Okay, thank you.
And just real quick to clarify, gunsmithing is a land use in this residential zone?
Yes, it's a conditional use within the suburban residential or SR zone. And so that was the reason spurred for the applicant to submit the application.
Question.
Yes.
It doesn't sound like he's going to drive any local traffic at all to his place. Does that sound like a fair statement?
Ed, staff.
I would say yes. That's what I concluded in my staff report. With the site visit and talking with the applicant, it seemed as if it would. He just wants to get his apparatus fine-tuned, and so it would just be maybe an extra UPS truck or something delivering a gun he had ordered, but it wouldn't be any customer traffic.
Call the roll.
Commissioner Springer,
Yes.
Commissioner Halsted,
Yes.
Commissioner McIntyre,
No.
Vice Chair Fikes,
Yes.
Commissioner Askin,
Yes.
Commissioner Greenberg.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And just a note, there is a 15-day appeal period that you can appeal to the state, or to, excuse me, to the city. And moving on to F2. An application for amendment to a conditional use permit, Resolution PZ 2019-44. Application for an amendment to conditional use permit PZ 03-32 is amended by Resolution PZ 05-35 and PZ 16-39 and transferred by Resolution PZ 2018-09 to remove the restriction that all fill material must originally be from the 52.5-acre site located at 2369 Beaver Loop Road and further described as Tract A1 Beaver Loop Acres, Addition Number 1. The application was submitted by David Yarogi, P.O. Box 1290, Kenai, Alaska, on behalf of Beaver Loop Sand and Gravel, LLC. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fikes. So for this agenda item, starts on page 26 of the packet. And then my staff report starts on page 32. And I'll note I included some supporting documents. Probably the most, the maps are on page 42 and 43 that show the location of this gravel pit along Beaver Loop Road. And there's also a photograph from a site visit. And in the file, there's also a site plan and some testing that was done. So what we have before the commission is a request to amend a conditional use permit for surface extraction. What the applicant is requesting is for condition 7 of their conditional use permit. It states that if fill material is placed in the pits, it must be fill material originally from this approximately 52.5-acre site. And it must not contain any hazardous substances or industrial waste, mining waste, solid waste, or other waste as defined in Alaska state statutes. So the request is that the statement that fill material has to be from the site be removed. So that's what's before the commission. So I flipped to page 37 where it shows in brackets on condition 7 that if the commission approves this, that would be deleted. So there still would be condition 7, but it would state if fill material is placed in the pits, it must not contain any hazardous substances, etc. It just would delete this piece that the fill material has to come from the existing site. In my staff report, I went through, I reviewed the conditions for granting an issuance of a permit for surface extraction and conditions for granting a conditional use permit. For my verbal summary staff report, I don't want to go into detail for that, since I think what the applicant is requesting is reasonable, and other pits along Beaver Loop Road have done this, where they've taken overburden from other pits along the road and have used it for their reclamation. So I felt this request would help aid in the reclamation of this gravel pit, as the applicant wants to use overburden from a neighboring gravel pit. And so removing this condition, I felt confident that the land would still be protected within the city, because the condition that no hazardous substances or waste be in the fill is still there, but it would allow the applicant to move forward with their reclamation plan to fill in part of the site that they would like to for their reclamation. And I also want to note that the applicant is in the audience, so we can call him up so the commission can hear directly from the applicant. And that's the end of my staff report.
Thank you. Can I have a motion, please?
He was first.
Commissioner Halsted.
I recommend we approve Resolution PZ 2019-44, application for amendment to conditional use permit, PZ 03-32.
I would second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Springer. And
I don't think there's much to talk about, really. It's, my name's Dave Ureg.
oh, if you'll step up to the mic and just state your name and address for the record, and then maybe if any commissioners have any questions, maybe we can ask them at that time.
Okay, my name's Dave Uregi, and, I live down Eastway Road, but this is our gravel pit. And, basically, in the process, when this property was transferred, I read all of the, rules and things that the city was permitting. One of the things the city wasn't permitting was to bring in any material to reclaim the pit. So when I originally bought the property, we came in and got a variance to the permit because my father-in-law had dug right up to the property line. And so what I've been trying to do this last summer was reclaim that whole area on the north side of the pit, and have got it probably 80%. So the problem is that Beaver Loop construction is going on right now, and QAP didn't own the Combs pit, so they needed a place to put the materials that was coming off Beaver Loop. So I gave them an area to put it, which is basically to develop a 2-to-1 slope, knowing that at some point I was going to have to come before the city and get a variance on the permit to bring in materials to reclaim the pit. We can't extract the material out of the pit and reclaim it at the same time. So what I've done is I've hauled probably 100,000 yards of topsoil, peat, and gravel into the pit off Beaver Loop, and started reclamation on the whole north side of the pit where they had excavated out. So all I'm asking for is a variance to the permit so that we can reclaim it with materials outside the pit. That's it.
Sounds good, thank you. Commissioners? Go ahead and step up to the mic if you'll state your name and address.
My name is Mike Ashwell. I live at 2497 Beaver Loop Road. Our property is immediately adjacent to the gravel pit. It's one of the little cutout squares in the map. As long as you know, it's just overburden from QAP's pit to construct or do the reconstruction of Beaver Loop Road. It's just a place to put the overburden and refill Dave's pit. We don't have an issue with it. As long as it's, you know, non-hazardous, non-toxic, not a bunch of, you know, freezers, washers, and dryers, etc., being used to be buried there. That's okay with us. Thanks.
Thank you. Nope. Anybody else in the audience that wants to speak to PZ 2019-44? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public comment and bring it back to the commission.
McIntyre.
McIntyre, thank you.
Good Scottish name. To the point that was raised by the last gentleman, so would those materials that he mentioned, freezers, washers, old cars, all fall under the substances not permitted by the state in that area?
I'm gonna,
Yes, I'll also just note that that our condition, aside from any state regulations, so number 7 would still state that the fill material could not contain any hazardous substances, industrial waste, mining waste, solid waste, or other waste. So if it's an old freezer, I would consider that to be waste.
This seems like a pretty solid win. I mean, it's an excellent use of the additional materials will be reclaimed from Beaver Loop Road. Help speed up that project. It fills the need or the burden of trying to find materials. It sounds like a great opportunity. Everything looks good here.
thank you, Commissioner Halsted, I agree.
Does the material get tested for chemicals or anything like that? Just considering it's coming from a roadway. There's a lot of oils leak and stuff from cars, that type of thing. So is there any way to ensure that it doesn't have anything like that in it?
Staff?
I guess just to clarify, the applicant, my understanding is he would be using materials from the neighboring pit, not from. It wouldn't be coming from the road. Like, it wouldn't be the asphalt waste. It would be, his plan is to use the overburden from a neighboring gravel pit. I don't know if perhaps the applicant could speak to that, but I know that in order to get the permit for that pit, the soils there had to be tested.
I can tell you this, my mother-in-law lives there at the pit. The last thing I'm gonna do is contaminate her house. I live with her daughter, so, we're not hauling any of that pit that's not organic. I suspect that the peat has more, oils in it than what was, but, you know, our intention is to develop an RV park on the whole pit. That's gonna be the reclamation. 2-to-1 slope on the north, east, and the south is up against Beaver Loop Road, and eventually that'll come out, that barrier will come out, and it'll be an RV park. So, you're still not going to see it from the road, but, the access is for people to come in there with their motorhomes and park on the lake, and it's a win-win. Cunningham Park's right across the street, so if it gets too out of hand, we'll just close the gate. But right now, we want to, and so it's very, very clean right now.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Go ahead, Steph.
I just wanted to state that just a reminder, an RV park would require a conditional use permit. So so if that does end up being your plan along the line, that that would come before the commission. But no matter what, I think reclaiming the land is important. But yeah, just wanted to add that.
So, I think it's a great idea also. I'm always for good reclamation. I do think the concern that Commissioner Greenberg brought up about if they do start tearing up the tar on the road, that they're not.
Bringing the asphalt into the pit.
Okay.
They did dump a load in there, QAP did dump a load in there before Combs's pit was secured, but, and I have right away, just because I don't want any kind of grief from anybody in our family, and there's a lot of family members, so. I believe QAP is going to crush that asphalt and put it back down. I'm not sure, but I think that's what their plan is on Beaver Loop Road.
Any other questions? Clerk, can I call the roll, please?
Commissioner Halsted,
Yes?
Commissioner McIntyre,
Yes?
Vice Chair Fikes,
Yes.
Commissioner Askin,
Yes.
Commissioner Greenberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Springer.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Alrighty, moving on to item G, unfinished business. And seeing we have no unfinished business, I'll move on to item H. New business. One is a review of the Kenai Peninsula Borough Substitute Ordinance 2019-24, adopting a Kenai Peninsula Borough 20.80 subdivision, private streets, and gated subdivisions. This is a discussion item, so I'm going to call on the city planner to provide an overview, and at some point I'm going to turn it over to the Kenai Peninsula Borough staff.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fikes. So page 56 of the packet has my little summary memo. So the Kenai Peninsula Borough is proposing an ordinance 2019-24. It would allow for the creation of private streets and gated subdivisions in a way other than the borough exemption process. So they could be created at the time of the subdivision or after the streets have been dedicated. The ordinance would also set out requirements and standards for private roads and gated subdivisions. And then I recap some of the Borough Planning Commission meeting discussion that has gone on so far. And I note that Borough staff has been talking with City of Kenai staff and with other cities and other planning and zoning commissions of the cities within the borough. So in the original packet, the ordinance is in there and some memorandums. There's also some additional material in the laydown. So there's two items. There is a memo on the second page of the laydown from the borough planning director. Just describes some additional changes and further discussion that occurred. And then there's also some comments that have been submitted on the ordinance just for the commission's information. And I have a note. The city manager wanted me to pass on just some information. He wasn't able to be here tonight, but he wanted to state that he wanted to ensure that the city of Kenai has the ability to veto or say no vacations and private subdivisions for both new applications and existing subdivisions. And I think his concern was over, shoot, I forget if his greater concern was over the newer existing, but he wanted to make certain that this existing, he wanted to make certain that the city had the ability to say no for both scenarios. And this will also be on the city council's agenda for consideration or discussion at their December 4th meeting. And with that, we have borough staff in the audience to give some additional information on the ordinance. And thank you so much for being here tonight.
And with that, I will turn it over to the borough.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Nackstead, and members of the commission. Appreciate everything you do and all the work you put in, and of course, staff. First and foremost, and, something that goes said how much work they put in and they do for us on a daily basis. So I want to shout out to them and thank them for all their work. The ordinance was generally designed in three typical scenarios. One was at the time of subdivision that you could develop a private street and have a tract of land instead of a right-of-way that could be gated and regulated and maintained by the homeowners within that area. The second scenario is an already existing right-of-way that is converting it from a dedication to a private tract. And the third is going from a private tract back to a dedicated right-of-way, or getting the road back, which may or may not happen depending on how the subdivision is operated and designed to take on the maintenance. So what we've developed here is something fairly simple. I mean, it was a little more complicated about who owned the tract, how they had to form it, and we took all that out and basically said that, I don't know, we don't really care, but we do care that who owns it. It's just, advantageous for us to not have anything to do outside the borough. The city's become much more complicated. Outside the borough, we don't require streets to be built prior to the subdivision, so they can generally build whatever they want. And that's where the rub kind of comes with the city, because the cities have installation agreements and certain situations where you require sidewalks, and sometimes it's just ditched and paved, and depending on the situation, the number of lots would be required, what you would in your installation require. I believe that the cities should have the right to say yes or no. As the plating authority, we kind of hold those cards as the end say in a plating action. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't listen to the cities. We generally think that, your subdivision regulation is something we should follow and adhere to. And that's where, my discussions with the city manager and city managers throughout the borough, we've taken a trip to Homer and Soldotna, meeting here. Everybody's subdivision code, yours, is different. And so we were trying to come up with a one-size-fits-all for the cities. Right now, currently, we say to people, go to the city, get their approval, and then come to the borough. That's what your code says. That's what our code says. You got to go to the city first. If you don't have anything for, let's use the example of flag lots. City of Soldotna prohibits flag lots. They don't like them. They think they're unuseful and they're hard to service people's houses and fire apparatus, et cetera. So they have in their subdivision regulations, we don't want them. So right away, they go to the city, and the city would say to them, no, you can't have a flag lot. And we say, we're going to honor that. We have flag lot requirements and standards, but we typically honor the city's standards. You could probably appeal that, but I mean, we'd probably come up with some good findings to establish that we're going to adhere to what the city subdivision standards are. So in this particular case, you go to the city. somebody would come to you, to your commission, and say, I want to do a private subdivision. You don't really have any standards yet. You'd have to almost rely on our standards. You could, let's say you did or didn't like it. And this is where the rub comes in, is we want you to have something that says, oh, there's a set of standards, or maybe you're just going to prohibit them. Maybe the council says, no, we're not ready for that. You have one, but that was through the exception process that the applicant was able to get city streets. I think he came back to the planning commission and onto the assembly, asked for some exceptions. I don't recall the process, but it's something like that. He said, go back to the city if they don't want the streets or whatever they require for city streets to be built to, we're good with it. So the exception was granted, and the applicant has private streets. They're not gated, they're private streets at this time. Soldotna has one. There's one outside the borough of Kenai Keys. It's been operating for, I don't know, probably 45 years now, and quite successfully. They have a gate that they've always had there. They have Knox Box that is basically a system, universal system throughout the United States, where emergency service providers have it's a combination or a key that's universal to all Knox boxes. You get in and it's a padlock or it's something that opens the gate. They have an electronic gate in and a manual gate, so you can, if there's a power failure, you can get through there. So they've over time worked out how their private subdivisions work. And, people wanted privacy and generally would also continue to pay. That was a big question as well. Are they going to be exempt property tax for the road service tax? No, they still get to pay our road service area tax, and the same probably in the city. You're still going to pay for that portion of whatever taxes that city allocates for road maintenance. So it's, it's that trade-off. They're going to maintain it, operate it, and take care of it. I believe you're covered when it comes to converting from a public right-of-way to a private street. Through the operation of law, as the statute reads, which we parrot, it says that the city has 30 days in which they may veto an approval of a vacation. So that would come back to your council if if you decided, no, we don't want a gated subdivision because we don't have any rules or zoning or wherever you put it in your code doesn't address it. You could say, no, we don't want to do that. Veto the action of our planning commission, your planning commission's recommendation. So that you kind of hold the cards there, and I think that was somewhat of an important aspect. Now, at the time where you are building one, we set the bar pretty high from the borough's point of view. We only are going to allow you one exception. And that exception is to front on a dedicated right-of-way. You still have to meet all the other standards, the to and through access, just 3-to-1, lot design, all of the things that go into our subdivision code that you deal with, that they are still required. So the only thing there would be that catch as to how does the city want to deal with it? Do they want to stop the utilities and say, okay, there you go, there's our water and sewer, there's our system. We don't care what kind of roads you built, but you're still kind of obligated to provide emergency services, so you may care what the road conditions are. So every city's going to probably have some variable, amount of standards that they think would be necessary. Or, of course, the easy thing is that, no, we don't like them, we don't want them. That's easy enough to handle. But there may be a situation that you may think that they're necessary or that you want to do it. But you certainly have a lot more obligations and infrastructure that need to be adhered to than we do. We want them to be able to follow your access plan, your trail plan, your water and sewer plan. All of those things we don't want that interrupted either, because there's that plan to provide those services throughout the city in a general area, expansive way. And if you stop it in some place, it may not be advantageous to continue on if you stop it some. So that's where you may want to own the water and sewer, treat it just like a an easement that you could gain, and you'd have access to it and bill it out the same way per lot, or you could stop it at the property. So those are all discussion items that would need to be taken up with the city. Lots of things to think about. We've requested, last night they requested after enactment of this ordinance, so you know what you're dealing with, 180 days after the enactment. So, you know, as you can see, we keep changing it. And so it might be something that you could take a half a year, work it into your subdivision code or your zoning or somewhere where it fits. And you know, Scott Huff, the plating officer, and I are available to help work through those things if you want our help. You know, we don't have a silver bullet on it, but we certainly would put it out there. And I think then from then, you know, taking it something forward to your council in the interim, or working up to that point for 180 days and coming up with something. So there's going to be some time for you to be able to figure out what you do and don't want to do with it. And so I'll answer any questions. I may defer to Scott.
Anybody have any questions? Nada? Wow. Councilman,
I don't usually jump in. I'm just here to watch. But I did have a question, and maybe it's in excess of what you're doing here, but condominium type subdivisions, and the borough has several of those. Does this apply to those at all in any way? I'm not sure if those are private right-of-ways or not, or because they're not right-of-ways. And I'm not sure the commission knows what we're talking about either. Some do.
Yeah, so what Mr. Nexted is referring to is what we are coining as condo visions. They're the sale of what I consider is probably circumventing the plotting process by using the Condominium Act through the statutes. But they're not just selling structures, which condominiums, the division of bricks and mortar, as far as you go out and you have a meets and bounds, and you describe an area on land. In my mind, that's a subdivision. So in those situations, it's not necessarily a violation of law. There's just a little bit of a conflict. In some of those situations, we're not getting adequate width right-of-ways, depending on the size of the area. But yeah, Henry, to answer your question is yes. Sorry, Mr. Nax did. Known him for a long time. So they could gate, they could gate those condominium type areas, and there wouldn't be anything we can do. And I think I don't know how you guys deal with condominiums in the city. So I know outside that could be something.
I have a question for you. You said that Kenai Keys has right now a gated community. Is there one off of Shahansky?
No, not that I'm aware of. It would be maybe one of those camper parks or something down there, possibly.
Riverquest has a tract that's not a dedicated right of way.
Maybe I'm on the wrong street. So down by the college, off of Bonita, Tall Timbers is the name of it.
Oh, yeah, it's Dr. Kroll's property.
Yes.
That's a condominium.
Yeah.
That's a condominium. Okay, so that's an example of the shared land that you were talking about? Okay, thanks.
I guess I'll interject, because the one subdivision I'm thinking of within the city of Kenai, there's not actually a gate. It's just their private roads. So they're just, because I think we tend to think of where the houses are built and there's a gate leading to the road, but we have one in the city where there are private roads, but there are no houses built off of the roads, and so it's been a bit tricky for law enforcement and such because the city doesn't maintain those roads, but people can still go down them. So that was just my 2 cents, because that was the one I was thinking of that actually caused some trouble for the city. It's in Valhalla Heights, where there's private roads in this area, but the houses actually were not built off of the roads that were constructed.
and I will interject to add a little more, some of the questions that we did get in concerns were if you were going to go to a private, from a public asset to a private. And a lot of times you guys require road construction prior to plat. There's an installation agreement, and the homeowner or the developer, a lot of times, even maybe in conjunction with the city through, I don't know what your match program is in the borough, we did a 50% match, and maybe it's 75, it's depending on the monies that you get. And they were concerned about those assets being turned over to a private, to somebody, said, who's gonna pay for that? There was also questions about who pays for the land. And generally speaking, dedications were given to the municipalities to begin with, so there would be no compensation. If you bought the right of way, yeah, you should be compensated to give it back. But if it was a dedication, we'd probably just end up saying, yeah, okay, you can have it. I know our roads director was much like, okay, you can have it. What it costs us to maintain them, and we don't want any part of it. But once again, the bar is pretty high when you're developing a subdivision. It's probably a small cul-de-sac, 5 or 6 lots. That you could do something like that. If you did a bigger one, you might have to provide some roads around, but it would be a cul-de-sac situation where there wasn't that requirement to provide access to the adjoining lots, or it ends at the river. It's just a handful, and we took the last year's worth of plats and went back through them, and it was just very few. I'm going to say, 3 or 4 maybe that would apply out of 100, 150 plats. So it's just very seldom that it would meet that bar for a private subdivision.
If I could, too, one other hurdle for a developer within a city, any subdivision does get an installation agreement. They come to the city and they get an agreement for the roads and the water and sewer. Plats cannot be recorded until that installation agreement is in place. So that's another chance for the city to work with the developer and make sure if they want roads built, water and sewer built on the private tract, then they put in place. We can't approve the plat without that installation agreement.
But your code would need to point to the private tract as a road and access, maybe definition of roads and private access tracts or something. It could be that simple, and you could require that installation.
All righty, thank you. A lot to digest. Anybody else in the audience that would like to speak to this? No one else. All right. Anybody else have any questions? No? Okay, I'm going to move on to item number 2. H2 is a review of the City of Kenai Draft Hazard Mitigation Plan. This is a discussion item only, and I'll go ahead and call on the city planner, Elizabeth, again. If you can give us an overview, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fikes. At our last meeting, we had a scheduled public speaker give a presentation. That was Jennifer LeMay with LeMay Engineering and Consulting. And so in the laydown, we now have a draft plan. At that time, the draft was still internal. We were still incorporating some feedback from city staff, but now we have a draft plan available for public comment. And so I just wanted to share this with the Planning and Zoning Commission and just highlight a couple things. Some of them Jennifer talked about in her presentation. But there's a 30-day public comment. If the commissioners have any comments, either as an individual or if you'd like to delve into this more as the commission, you can either send them to me and I'll forward them to Jennifer, or you can send them directly to her. And there's a link under the Planning and Zoning webpage that talks about the plan, and people can download it. I wanted to state the importance of updating our hazard mitigation plan. So the hazard plans expire every 5 years. The last one on record for Kenai expired in 2019. Our plan is still an annex to the borough's hazard mitigation plan. However, theirs expired in 2019. And so if we have a current hazard mitigation plan, then we're eligible for some additional funding. So there's no guarantee about obtaining funding, but it just it opens up funds that are available before a hazard event happens, whereas if we don't have an updated hazard mitigation plan, we're only eligible for funds available following a major disaster declaration. So I just wanted to highlight that as one important reason to update the plan, in addition to just wanting to prevent damage from natural hazards. So I marked just a couple pages in the plan I wanted to highlight for the commission. So page 14 of the draft plan, that goes over the identification and screening of hazards, and that's something that Jennifer talked about in her presentation. She had a slide that went over the hazards, and then she talked a little bit about each of them in detail. And so I just wanted to point out table 3 that identifies hazards within Kenai. So note that ground failure and tsunamis were not identified as hazards. So ground failure typically has to do with subsidence, so melting permafrost is usually where that one is a yes. And then Kenai, we're not at risk for tsunamis, just how the inlet, we're not at risk for that. Erosion and wildland fire and earthquake are listed as the 3 priority hazards within the city. So the plan goes on, it details each of these plans. There's some history, goes over earthquakes and severe weather events within the city. It gives an estimate of the extent and the impact of each hazard. And on page 59, table 14 lists mitigation goals and potential actions. So it lists things that the city would like to do to prevent damage from various hazards. And so that table just goes through and each hazard and lists some actions. So the one here for F, it's the second row, reduce or eliminate erosion of the bluff at the mouth of the Kenai River. That's where it states an action item is we want to implement the recommendation from the 2018 Army Corps of Engineers report. And then towards the back of the plan, then these mitigation actions are described in more detail. Those are the main things I wanted to highlight about the plan. I suppose one other table I'll point out is the one on page 53. So let me know if I'm going too fast because I'm kind of skimming over this. But the table on page 53 identifies critical facilities. So these are facilities where the city really couldn't function if these were damaged. So the roads that are listed here are the ways out of the city. So that's why it's just the spur highway and bridge access road, because you couldn't get out of the city with a vehicle if those were blocked. And the star is an area that's identified as a shelter, so that's why the First Baptist Church is on this list. And most of the schools are also identified as a shelter, and I took that from the 2006 Emergency Operations Plan, and that's noted for an action related to this plan to update that because it's from 2006, so it's pretty out of date. And just one other reminder that the hazard plan is trying to prevent harm from natural disasters, whereas the emergency operations plan describes the city's plan to respond immediately to ensure public public safety and it's the immediate response to a hazard. It's not as much preventing damage before it occurs. So those are the things I wanted to point out about the hazard plan, and I wanted to make sure this was before the commission. You can comment through December 8th is the 30-day comment period. After that, then the plan will be, it'll incorporate updates based on the comments. Then it will be submitted to the state for review and then also to the federal government for review. After that, that is when the city would formally adopt this. So that's why this is a discussion item, just to, as a notification, the draft is out for review. But there'll be a further public discussion on in a resolution eventually that I anticipate next spring that would then formally adopt this. Any questions? And that's all I wanted to say. And then again, a reminder, this is online. If you go to the planning and zoning webpage, I added a new subpage that you can click on that has this in a PDF format. And then this will also be a discussion item, or sorry, not a discussion item. Jennifer will be presenting before the city council on December 4th. So then council will have a chance to ask questions or provide input before the draft is finalized and submitted to the state for review. That's all I wanted to say, unless there are questions or comments on the hazard plan.
I was just gonna ask a question. Do you guys work at all with the Red Cross? Is there any input from them as well on any of the plans?
Not for this one. So there was a planning team. There's a list of who is on it, if I can find it quickly. I think it'll take me a bit to find it, but, oh, here, page 10. So that lists city staff who worked on the plan. So there was input from the police chief, fire chief, and fire marshal. The Red Cross, I think, would be more appropriate for that emergency operations plan, since they're more concerned with immediate health and safety in the event of a natural disaster, whereas this is this is more maybe we could educate the public to anchor things so in an earthquake there is less damage. So I think the Red Cross's input would come in that emergency operations plan, where that's detailing how they'd respond to injuries and such.
That makes sense. Thank you, Planner Appleby. Does anybody else have any questions, comments? No? Okay, that brings us to item I, pending items. We have none, so that brings us to item J, reports. City Council. I'll turn it over to Councilman Nexted.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fikes. And it's good to be back. I know all of you. Mr. McIntyre, I think you've been appointed in the last year, so I was liaison 2 years ago. So anyway, glad to be here. And as always, I'll go through the last agenda. If you guys have any questions as I go, you can wait to the end, interrupt me how you want, whatever. But I'm gonna pick out the things that I think are most pertinent. You've got it in your list there. If there's something I missed, if it's not on the list at all, you're always welcome to ask anytime. So anyway, the last council meeting was on November 6th, and that is our only one for this month, as we have AML next week and all that. So anyway, so we won't be having another meeting. At that meeting, the first action item was we elected a new vice mayor. Bob Malloy is now our vice mayor for the city of Kenai for a year. Until next year. So he was unanimously accepted as that. We did have an ordinance amending the Kenai Municipal Code that actually went out to the voters at this last election. providing the terms of office for mayor and other council members shall begin the first Monday following the certification of the election. And if you haven't seen the process, the way it was is somebody would, let's say, win a seat, somebody might lose that seat. So the council, as it was, would sit and certify the election. And at that meeting, then the new council person and the old one, I mean, they kind of switch. So it was awkward and, you know, almost kind of like pointless, you know, for the council person that was leaving that seat to be here in a way. So now the way it'll work is the following meeting after it's been certified, and then it'll just kind of move more smoothly, I think. Everybody will be prepared. The next ordinance we reviewed and accepted was an appropriation of a grant from a U.S. Department of Homeland Security pass-through through the state of Alaska, Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. There were 3 items. There was a fire station alerting system, $45,000 for that, an IT audit system, or audit, and that was $35,000, and the base radio system replacement for dispatch, we got $393,000 for that, which is pretty good. It may not be quite enough, and they're kind of trying to figure out where that's going to fall, and there might be some supplemental on that, but that was a very nice grant for our little city to get. Speaking of nice grants, the next one was acceptance of a donation from Hillcorp. They've done this for the last 7 or 8 years for our senior center. They donated $3,500 for the Thanksgiving dinner. Graciously received that. And the next item is a resolution authorizing the city to join the Alaska Remote Seller Sales Tax Commission for the purpose of developing and implementing and enforcing a remote sellers sales tax commission. And that's being kind of all set up by Alaska Municipal League. They're setting this up. They've actually done all the work. And the commission will consist of folks from various cities around the state and boroughs. And that will be the entity that exists and they've got the rules kind of set up. But what that does is it allows the municipalities, the borough, the cities that collect taxes to receive taxes from all those remote sales that we do online for, you know, basically, you know, we're all competing, I guess, against our local vendors and whatnot, and it kind of brings that up. Plus, of course, it's a revenue generator for the city. So it doesn't it authorizes to join the commission, but it doesn't necessarily commit us to anything beyond that. It'll all be kind of established, and we'll see how it goes. I assume that that's the direction it will go, though. Then we also passed a resolution authorizing the city manager to recruit an additional police officer. The city has some difficulty keeping all the police officers. We want to have 8. We always seem to be short of that, so we established an extra position, a 9th one. So maybe we can achieve that, and we'll still have an empty slot, and it'll work. And they're just the competition is pretty stiff to keep police officers. It takes about a year to train them. You hire a police officer, somebody off the street. They go through all the training and all of that, and then they can go out and actually do police work, you know, as a new hire essentially. But anyway, we had to increase our, you know, unexpected budget for that, and we'll see how it goes. And the city manager is also looking at ways of you know, financially sweetening the pot, if you will, to retain our police officers longer. Then we passed a resolution that you folks must have looked at already, declaring a utility easement, a 20-foot wide utility easement between 2 shared lots. This is down on Bridge Access Road. Sound familiar? We approved that one. We awarded a contract for city-owned lands appraisals, and it's not all city lands. It's leased lands within the airport reserve, and I think some airport lands just outside. let's see. We had a discussion item of, we have some leftover personal use fishery capital funds that are available, that were just for the South Beach, but we can use them on the North Beach now. The city brought forth 3 possibilities of how those monies might be spent. And they have to be spent, if they're not, the time frame hasn't been extended, they have to be spent by this summer, frankly. And one of them was to build some outhouses, basically concrete on the north and south and all of that. And those would be permanent installations. There was a RV park kind of up on the bluff. And frankly, it escapes me what the third one was, but it was just a kind of a brief review. I guess I could have pulled it up while we were discussing here. And let's see, I already told you we're going to be off to AML next week. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and it's something that I brought up at council that I'm going to bring forward again, and I think will happen, but it came to my attention that there's no signs in town directing the public visitors to Old Town. You drive through, and in the old days, people would drive through and end up out by out there, and they went through Kenai. But anyway, we have Old Town Kenai and no sign that directs you toward Old Town Kenai. One of those big brown signs or something like that hanging. But anyway, we really should have something like that. I think it'll increase folks going to the visitor center. And, you send them in that direction, and frankly, Old Town is kind of confusing. All of us have been here a long time. You park your car somewhere and start walking it, and you get lost. You do, So anyway, some interior signs, whatnot, directing folks to the church, to the rectory, Veronica's, I suppose, but we also have the cabins and all of that kind of stuff, just to kind of get them around, and maybe some interior signs like that. But I would imagine that would be something that would be coming back to you folks, anything like inside there in that respect. But we'll see. It's just an idea. I just living here, where it is, so you don't miss something that isn't. But anyway, does anybody have any questions of me? No? Okay.
I can interject the 3 projects for the third project. It was to replace the shacks because the 2 of the, I forget if it was North or South Beach, but it was to replace some of the shacks because they're pretty beat up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's the shacks for paying when you go through.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
All righty. Thank you, Councilman Nexted, for that report.
I have just a question. I don't know
Go
if
ahead.
you can answer this, but it refers back to your comments about the joining the commission to collect sales taxes from
Yes.
distance groups or vendors. Some of those are already charging taxes now. Are those not coming back to us?
There is one, Elizabeth, there is one that is coming to Kenai, and some of them are we all pay, we all buy things, and sometimes you pay a tax. I have no idea where that money goes, and I don't think it's coming here. They don't know what our tax structure is. They don't know how to split it up between Kenai and the borough, or if you live in Soldotna, or so. Yeah, well, it will capture that, and it, if it's a very small, let's say in your house, you sell, or your wife sells baskets or something, and just a small amount of money, it doesn't really pertain to that. It has to have a higher threshold. So it's most of these bigger outlets, but for them to be doing business here, I'm not sure exactly how we would capture them, but they will be required then to collect tax and remit it to the borough, and for just so you're right. I think that there's taxes paid that it's probably just additional income for some of those out there. That's what I think, but I don't know where it goes.
Have to get the collection folks in on that. All right, anybody else have any comments, questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to item JB, the borough planning. And I will go ahead and give that report. Let me see. The borough met on Tuesday, since we had a holiday on Monday. We had the plat committee before us, and then they adjourned at 8 o'clock. They came over a little bit. Had quite a bit on the docket, a little bit of contention. And then we, at the planning commission, started ours at 8. We had a vacation of a 10-foot guy anchor easement in the Seward area that was ultimately approved. And then we moved on to talk about I think that was all I remember that was on the docket. I think we jumped in with the ordinance that they were talking about today. I think I remember the main part of the evening, we were discussing what they talked about today, and that was the incorporation of the subdivisions, private streets, and gated communities, the history behind it a little bit, the review of the resolution that they put forward, and ultimately the vote for whether they want to pass it on to the assembly for review and approval. And some of the concerns that they were brought up were, just like the borough had talked about, was, you know, the greatest concern comes with existing, I believe, development. So you've got existing neighborhoods or subdivisions that a group of folks want to all of a sudden develop into a gated community, and how's that going to come about? And like we talked about with the definition of a condominium, so now you've got a gated community and you've got utility easements, and now you're taking over possession of roadways. And so how does that possession look like as far as maintenance, as far as ownership? So there was a lot of discussion on and concern about that. We did hear testimony from some folks in Kenai Keys on the positive attributes, but to be honest, that was pretty much all we heard from. There wasn't anybody else against it or anybody else for it. It was just that one group of folks from that community that was speaking. And so with a vote of 6-4, we approved to move it on to the assembly for review and adoption. We did change, like they talked about, the rule for 180-day review. We did amend the resolution to include that 180 days, that should the borough assembly adopt it and put it into action, that the outlining areas have that 180 days to voice concern. And that concludes my report. Anybody else have any questions? Oh my goodness. I will go ahead and move on to item C, administration.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fikes. I just wanted to thank Bob Malay, our previous liaison. I had it in my head to do so when he was here at the last meeting, when he announced it, that he thought he may not be back, but he wasn't sure. So I wanted to formally state that in the record. I think he did a good job while he was the liaison, and looking forward to having Councilmember Nexted as our new liaison. One of the items that was recently before the City Council was to award a contract for appraisal of airport lands, as Councilmember Nexted reported. I just wanted to talk in a little bit more detail, just because Planning and Zoning Commission approves lease applications. So the appraisal covers properties where an appraisal is required every 5 years in order to determine the lease rate. And so most of the properties are within the airport reserve. There are some that are outside. I guess I should say most are within the airport fund. I know there are some that are outside of the reserve, but still tied to the airport fund. So anyway, this appraisal will determine new lease rates for several of our lessees. The new lands code that was adopted, it's in the new lease form, the new standardized lease form. It's an effort to move away from that 5-year jump and to instead adjust the lease rate annually based on a cost of living adjustment. So it is to avoid this 5-year jump. But anyway, this is still to appraise leases that are still under that policy where it's every 5 years. They're appraised, and that's how the lease rate is determined. I also just wanted to talk about code enforcement for cars on the street. So within the city of Kenai, you're not allowed to park overnight during, I believe I want to say it's October through April. I don't remember the exact dates, if it's October 1st or October 15th, but I know for certain we're within the period now, well within, where you're not supposed to park on the street just so the snowplows can get through. It's been sort of a tag team effort, so the Kenai police have been plaguing some cars if they're reported to us, and then we've towed a few if they seem to be abandoned. So I just wanted to touch upon that we've been working with Kenai police to try to get stuff out of the right of way and out of the road, so eventually when the snow falls that the plows have a safe way to get through on the streets. And then our schedule, our next meeting is canceled, and we decided to cancel that. We had discussed it at a couple of previous meetings. So the meeting on November 27th is canceled. That's the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And so then our next meeting will be Tuesday, December 11th. The meeting for December 25th, I also have noted to cancel because it's on Christmas. So December 11th will be our next Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. And then the last note I have is we've been working internally on some additional items related to the land's inventory. The city owns many parcels, over 300, about 365. So we've been talking internally how to move forward with the information about our city owns land that we can eventually bring forth somehow. It'll probably come to the Planning and Zoning Commission to see the inventory at some point, but that's been a topic of focus with city administration as of late. That is the end of my staff report.
Thank you, Planner Appleby. I just have one question. The borough was bringing up commissioner training in Anchorage again this coming year. Do you have any information on that?
Was that for the EPA conference, the American Planning Association?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I should come back at our next meeting with some more information on that. So this year's American Planning, the Alaska chapter of the American Planning Association conference is in February. I think last year it was in March, and then in years prior to that it had been in November. So this year it's in February. I have the dates. I don't know how much of the agenda, but I do want to bring that before the commission. I think we had budgeted, the budget for this year, it wasn't for the whole commission to go, but I definitely want to make sure that that some of the commissioners get to attend this. So I'll put a star to bring forth information at our next meeting for that. I'm glad you said something, Vice Chair Fikes. Yeah, because I thought that this week, but I will come forth with the next meeting with some information on that.
Great, thank you. Alrighty then, let's see. We are gonna Item K, additional public comments. Is there anyone wishing to address the commission at this time? Mr. Glendenning, come on down. You are up.
Thank you. Jim Glendenning, Woodland Subdivision, Kenai. Just want to thank Mr. Best for coming and explaining how this proposal for gated communities and/or private roads, et cetera, works. And they offered their good offices to help us with any deliberations we have and how to fit city concerns within the structure of borough ordinances. They are the keeper of record, so they're like 51%er in this relationship. So they will agree to a lot of things that we do, but we have to communicate with them. And as from our meeting last night, I attended, a lot of the big concerns from the planning commissioners were the concerns and the rights of the cities. And I think with the 180-day review for cities to individually, perhaps collectively in some form, get their ordinances and their codes laid out to be able to accommodate this concept of gated communities and private roads, I think is very helpful. I know in our own town, we have some holes in our codes and ordinances and even in the road specs and things like this that we work very, 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 very hard on. And then I noticed that in tonight's laydown, there's quite a bit of verbiage. And what it does is, as I saw it, recaps Borough Planning Commission notes and comments and questions going back into the summer. And this will be coming back before you at some time. And I urge you to go through and read this and see what some of the concerns are and some of the questions are. And I know you'll have more questions when we return, perhaps with an ordinance or a resolution, something for addressing this issue. But thank you all for your focus and your concern. And with that, I'll just pick my focals and go sit down. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Glendenning. Alrighty then, item M, our next meeting attendance. Does anyone plan on being absent? Good answer. Item N, commissioners' comments and questions. Commissioner McIntyre?
I'm good.
Commissioner Askin?
I want to welcome Mr. Nagstead back.
Commissioner Halsted?
I also would like to welcome Mr. Axel back. It's good to have you back, and also thank the staff for taking good care of us and always having good treats and water and keeping our board report up to date. So thank you very much.
Commissioner Greenberg?
Ditto.
Right. Commissioner Springer?
Yeah, I think it's okay that Mr. Nagstead is back. I think. No, I have nothing additional.
Alrighty, I echo Mr. Glendenning's testimony earlier. I think there's a lot of information in this packet, and I know there was a lot of concerns that was brought up with this new proposed code, so I really urge you to do your due diligence and homework and just put it out there. It's gonna take a lot of review and a lot of examination. It could be all or nothing or something in between, and lots of ways that the city can go on this, so all comments are definitely appreciated. That is all I have. And with that, we are adjourned. Do I need a motion? No. Okay.